The academic cycle continued at the Galactic Academy, but something fundamental had changed in the way. The other species viewed their single human classmate Elena, noticed it in the subtle ways they moved around her, giving her slightly more space in the corridors and speaking to her with a new tone of careful respect. She also noticed it in the way they looked at Mango, who had become something of a celebrity on the station. Students, who had once laughed at the small orange creature, now watched him with wary fascination, observing his every movement as though studying a dangerous phenomenon. Mango, for his part, seemed completely oblivious to his newfound fame and spent most of his time doing what cats had always done, sleeping in warm spots, demanding attention when he wanted it, and ignoring everyone when he did not. One evening, Elena received a message from Professor Vrexthil requesting a private meeting in his office, and she made her way through the Academy's winding corridors with Mango trotting at her heels. The professor's office was a fascinating space, filled with specimens and artifacts from dozens of worlds, and Elena spent a moment looking at the preserved creatures floating in stasis containers along the walls. "Thank you for coming," Professor Vrexthil said, gesturing for her to take a seat in a chair that had been specially configured for human anatomy. Elena sat down, and Mango immediately jumped into her lap, circling twice before settling into a comfortable position. The professor watched this display with his compound eyes, his mandibles clicking softly. "I have been teaching xenobiology for 300 cycles," he began, "and in all that time, I have never encountered a species quite like yours." Elena waited quietly for him to continue. "At first," the professor admitted, "I dismissed your presentation as a misunderstanding. For how could such a small creature possibly compare to the apex predators of other worlds?" He gestured toward the containment unit where the Shadow Stalker was being kept for further study, its dark form pressing against the energy barrier. "But then I saw the demonstration," he continued, "and I began to understand that I had made a fundamental error in my assumptions." Elena nodded, scratching behind Mango's ears as he purred contentedly. "The error," Professor Vrexthil said, "was believing that the size of a predator determined its danger, when in fact, the truly remarkable thing about your species has nothing to do with size at all." He rose from his desk and walked to the window, gazing out at the stars. "Every species in this academy fears predators," he said, "and they have developed elaborate methods of containment and control to protect themselves from dangerous creatures." He turned back to face Elena, his compound eyes reflecting the starlight. "But your species does something unprecedented," he continued, "something that I still struggle to fully comprehend." Elena waited, already knowing what he was going to say. "You befriend them," the professor said, and there was something almost like wonder in his translated voice. He walked back to his desk and sat down heavily, his exoskeleton creaking with the movement. "You look at creatures that evolution designed to kill," he said, "and instead of running away or destroying them, you reach out and try to make them your companions." Mango stretched in Elena's lap and yawned, showing his sharp teeth before curling up again. "It is not just cats," Professor Vrexthil continued, "for I have been researching your species since the demonstration." He pulled up a holographic display showing various images from Earth's history. "You domesticated wolves and turned them into dogs that guard you children," he said, showing images of massive canines playing gently with human infants. "You tamed horses and rode them into battle," he continued, displaying images of cavalry charges throughout human history. "You trained falcons to hunt for you and return to your hands," he added, showing a hawk swooping down from the sky to land on a human's leather-clad arm. "You even keep venomous snakes as pets," he concluded with obvious disbelief, "bringing creatures into your homes that could kill you with a single bite." Elena smiled and nodded. "We do seem to have a habit of that," she admitted. Professor Vrexthil leaned forward, his mandibles clicking rapidly. "But why?" he asked, and the question seemed to come from somewhere deep within him. Why would any species deliberately seek out danger and try to form bonds with it? Elena considered the question carefully before answering. She thought about her grandmother's dog that had protected the family for 15 years, and her childhood cat that had slept at the foot of her bed every night. She thought about the horses she had ridden at summer camp and the parrot that lived in her neighbor's house and called out greetings whenever she walked past. I think, she said slowly, it is because humans are lonely. The professor tilted his head in confusion. We evolved on a dangerous world, Elena continued, surrounded by creatures that wanted to eat us. And we survived not because we were the strongest or fastest, but because we learned to work together. She stroked Mango's fur as she spoke, and he purred louder in response. But working together was not enough to fill the emptiness, she said, because no matter how many humans surrounded us, there was always something missing. She looked up at the professor with a gentle smile. So we reached out to other species, she explained. Not to conquer them or control them, but to find connection with something different from ourselves. Professor Vrexthale was silent for a long moment. That is a remarkable way to approach the universe. He finally said. Elena laughed softly. I suppose it is, she agreed. But to us, it is just the way we have always been. She stood up, cradling Mango in her arms, and walked to the window to look out at the stars. Somewhere out there, she said quietly, are billions of species we have never met, and when we finally encounter them, our first instinct will not be to fear them or destroy them. She turned back to face the professor. Our first instinct will be to reach out our hands and say, hello, she said, and to ask if maybe, just maybe, they might want to be our friends. Professor Vrexthal rose from his desk and joined her at the window. Perhaps, he said thoughtfully, that is why your species will go far in this galaxy. He looked down at Mango, who had fallen asleep in Elena's arms, his small body rising and falling with each peaceful breath. You see aliens and think not of threat, the professor continued, but of potential friendship. And that is something truly rare in a universe that so often operates on fear. Elena smiled and shifted Mango to a more comfortable position. Well, she said, it has worked out pretty well for us so far. She looked down at the sleeping cat, this small predator that had chosen to share its life with her species so many thousands of years ago. And I think it will keep working, she added, for as long as there are humans who are willing to reach out toward the unknown and ask if it would like to be friends. Professor Vrexthal clicked his mandibles in what Elena had learned was his species, equivalent of a smile. I believe you may be right, he said. And for the first time since she had arrived at the academy, Elena felt like she truly belonged among the stars. The lights in Lecture Hall 7 flickered and then dimmed to a soft blue glow as Professor Vrexthal moved toward the central podium with slow and careful steps, his 6 antennae twitching with what his students recognized as nervous excitement, and his translucent skin pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that betrayed his emotional state to anyone who knew how to read Selthorian body language. The lecture hall aboard the Galactic Union Academy station was filled with 30 students from 12 different species, all of them seated in specially designed chairs that accommodated their various body types, from the armored bulk of the Thalaxians to the delicate floating membranes of the Plovians. And every single one of them had come to this class with a mixture of dread and fascination because today's subject was one that haunted the nightmares of prey species across the galaxy today. They would study apex predators. Welcome, students, Professor Vrexthal said, his voice carrying the musical quality common to his species, though it trembled slightly at the edges. Today, we continue our examination of the most dangerous life forms cataloged by Union xenobiologists. I must warn you that the images and sounds you will experience may trigger instinctive fear responses. So please remember that you are safe here and that the emergency medical team is standing by as always. Ripple of nervous chittering and clicking spread through the room as students shifted in their seats and checked their personal comfort devices, making sure their anxiety suppressants were ready if needed in the back row. Partially hidden in the shadows where the lighting was dimmest, sat a figure that still drew curious and sometimes fearful glances from her classmates even after 3 months at the academy. And her name was Maya Chun, a specialist in the Galactic Union Officer Exchange program and the only human currently enrolled at this prestigious institution. Maya had grown used to the stares and the whispered conversations that stopped whenever she walked into a room, because humans were still new to the galactic community and most species had never met one in person. Only heard rumors and speculation about the strange bipedal mammals from an unclassified world on the outer edge of Union space. She leaned back in her chair, which had been specially modified to accommodate her unusual skeletal structure, and watched with mild interest as the professor activated the first holographic display. A creature appeared in the center of the room, projected at full scale, and it was a nightmare of claws and teeth and armored scales that towered over even the largest students, its 4 eyes glowing with predatory intelligence as the hologram prowled in a slow circle. The Krillvex Mauler, Professor Vrethkai announced, and several students whimpered audibly, native to Krillvex Prime. This apex predator can grow up to 6 meters in length and has been responsible for the extinction of 3 sentient species before Union intervention. The hologram shifted and changed, showing creature after creature, each one more terrifying than the last. And Maya noticed that her classmates were responding with increasing distress as the presentation continued, with some of them releasing defensive pheromones that made her eyes water slightly and others activating their natural camouflage in an instinctive attempt to hide. She found herself wondering why these species had such strong fear responses to predators they would never encounter in person. But then she remembered that most Union species had evolved as prey animals on their homeworlds, developing intelligence and technology as a survival mechanism rather than as a tool of dominance. It made sense, she supposed, that they would carry those ancient fears with them even into the age of starships and energy shields. And now, the professor said, his antennae going rigid with barely concealed anxiety, we examine a newly catalogued world that has only recently come to the attention of Union xenobiologists. A planet so dangerous that it has been provisionally classified as a Class 7 death world. One of only 12 such worlds ever discovered. The holographic display flickered and changed, showing a beautiful blue and green planet that made Maya's heart ache with sudden homesickness. Designation: Earth. Professor Vrethkai continued. Homeworld of the species known as humans. Every head in the room turned toward Maya, and she felt 30 pairs of eyes, some compound and some singular, and some mounted on stalks, focusing on her with a mixture of fear and fascination that she had never experienced before. We have limited data on this world, the professor admitted, but what we have gathered is deeply concerning. And I will now play an audio recording captured by a long-range probe that observed the planet's surface from orbit. He pressed the control on his podium, and a sound filled the lecture hall that made Maya sit up straighter in her seat with sudden recognition. It was a scream, deep and guttural and filled with primal menace. A sound that echoed off the walls and seemed to vibrate in the bones of every student present. And the effect on the class was immediate and dramatic. A Plovian student in the front row fainted, its floating membrane going limp and drifting slowly toward the floor as its consciousness fled from the terrible noise. And 3 Kethri students vanished completely as their camouflage instincts activated at maximum intensity, leaving only empty chairs where they had been sitting moments before. Someone triggered an emergency beacon, and alarms began to flash in the corridor outside. And the Thalaxian student nearest to Maya curled into a defensive ball, its armored plates locking together with an audible click, and Maya laughed. The sound cut through the chaos like a blade. And suddenly every eye was on her again. But this time, the looks were not just curious or fearful, but utterly bewildered. Because how could anyone laugh at such a terrifying sound? "That is just a puma," Maya said, still grinning with amusement and perhaps a touch of homesickness. "They are basically big cats, and we have them as pets sometimes. Well, not pumas specifically, but close enough." My aunt had a tabby that was way meaner, honestly. The silence that followed her words was so complete that Maya could hear the soft hum of the station's life support systems and the distant beeping of the emergency beacon that someone had forgotten to deactivate. Professor Vrethkai's antennae had gone completely still, and his bioluminescent patterns had frozen in a display that Maya did not recognize but suspected meant something like total cognitive shutdown. "You recognize this predator?" he finally managed to ask, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sure," Maya said with a casual shrug that seemed to horrify her classmates even more than the predator sound had. "Mountain lion, cougar, puma, same animal with different names, depending on where you are. They are ambush predators that weigh maybe 70 kilograms or so. And honestly, we have way scarier stuff back home." The words hung in the recycled air of the lecture hall like a death sentence. And Maya-chan had no idea that she had just changed the galaxy forever. The lecture hall remained frozen in stunned silence for what felt like an eternity. And Maya began to feel uncomfortable under the weight of so many alien stares, wondering if she had somehow committed a terrible social error by laughing at the recording of a sound that had sent her classmates into panic. Professor Vrethkai was the first to recover. Though his antennae continued to tremble, and his bioluminescent patterns flickered with colors that Maya had learned to associate with extreme distress. "You said," the professor began, his voice cracking slightly, "that you have scarier creatures on your homeworld than this apex predator that we have classified as one of the most dangerous animals in the newly cataloged sectors?" Maya considered the question carefully, trying to remember her brief training in interspecies diplomacy and the importance of not causing unnecessary alarm when discussing human culture and biology. "I mean, pumas are definitely dangerous," she said, choosing her words with care. "People do get attacked and killed by them sometimes, but they are not even close to the top of the list when it comes to things that can hurt you on Earth." A Thalaxian student, its armored carapace still rattling with residual fear, raised one trembling appendage to ask a question, and Maya noticed that it had not fully uncurled from its defensive ball. What could possibly be more frightening than that sound? It asked, its translator rendering its clicks and whistles into standard galactic with a slight delay. That was clearly the vocalization of a perfect killing machine. A predator evolved over millions of years to hunt and destroy. Maya could not help but smile at this description, because to her the mountain lion's scream was simply a familiar sound of the wilderness, something she had heard on camping trips with her family when she was young. "Well, they are saltwater crocodiles," she said, starting to count on her fingers. "Those can grow up to 6 or 7 meters long, and they have the strongest bite force of any living animal. And they do this thing called a death roll, where they grab you and spin until pieces come off." The Plovian who had fainted earlier woke up just in time to hear this description and immediately fainted again, its membrane crumpling to the floor with a soft rustle. "Then there are great white sharks," Maya continued, not noticing the growing horror around her. "Those are ocean predators that can sense electrical signals from your heartbeat, and they have rows and rows of teeth that regrow when they fall out. And box jellyfish that have venom so painful that people have been known to go into shock and drown before the poison even finishes killing them." "Please," Professor Vrethkai whispered. But Maya was warming to her subject now. Oh, and polar bears. Those are like regular bears, but bigger, and they will actively hunt humans because food is so scarce in their environment. And hippos kill more people in Africa than almost any other large animal, even though they only eat plants. And then there are mosquitoes. She paused for dramatic effect. And every conscious student in the room leaned forward despite their terror. Mosquitoes are tiny insects that drink blood. And they carry diseases that kill about 1 million humans every single year. 1 million? Professor Vrethkai repeated, his translator glitching and stuttering as it tried to process the number in context. 1 million of your people die every orbital cycle to a single species of blood-drinking insect. Give or take, Maya said with a shrug. We have been working on it. But those little guys are persistent. She was about to mention the kangaroo, a small fish from the Amazon River with truly horrifying habits. But she caught the look on the professor's face and decided that perhaps she had shared enough for one day. Actually, you know what? Never mind about the rest, she said, trailing off awkwardly as she noticed that several more students had either fainted or fled the room entirely. The class was dismissed early, and Maya found herself walking back to her quarters through corridors that seemed to empty as she approached, with alien students pressing themselves against walls and doorways to let her pass, their eyes wide and their various fear. Responses fully activated, she did not understand what was happening until she checked her personal communication device and found that she had received over 200 messages in the last hour, most of them from academic officials and union representatives requesting urgent meetings by evening. Word of the incident had spread across the entire station, passed from student to student and faculty member to faculty member in an ever-expanding wave of shock and fascination. And Maya found herself standing before the Academy's Xenological Studies Board in a conference room that felt far too large for the conversation they were about to have. The board consisted of 12 senior academics from various species, all of them experts in their fields, and all of them staring at Maya with expressions that ranged from scientific curiosity to barely concealed terror. Specialist Chun, the board's chairperson, began, an ancient Selthorian whose bioluminescent patterns had faded with age. We have been reviewing the data from today's lecture and cross-referencing it with the limited information we have about your homeworld. And we find ourselves with many questions. I will answer what I can, Maya said, standing at attention as her training had taught her. How did your species survive? The chairperson asked, and Maya could hear genuine bewilderment in the translated words. Your planet appears to be one of the most hostile environments we have ever cataloged, filled with predators and parasites and environmental hazards that should have driven any intelligent species to extinction long before they could develop technology. Maya thought about this question for a long moment, considering all the history lessons she had endured in school and all the nature documentaries she had watched as a child and all the stories her grandmother had told her about the old days when humans lived even closer to nature than they did now. We learned to be scarier than the things trying to eat us, she finally said. And the simplicity of her answer seemed to disturb the board more than any detailed explanation could have. Scarier, the chairperson repeated, as if tasting the word. You became more frightening than apex predators and venomous creatures and million-killing insects? We became the apex predators, Maya said, and something in her voice made even the bravest members of the board lean back in their chairs. Everything on Earth is afraid of us now, even the things with the biggest teeth and the deadliest venom, because we taught them to be afraid over thousands and thousands of years. The silence that followed was thick with implications that the board was only beginning to understand. And Maya Chun stood before them as a representative of a species that suddenly seemed far more significant than anyone had previously imagined. The Xenological Studies Board launched a full investigation into humanity and their homeworld in the days following Maya's testimony, gathering every scrap of data that Union probes and scouts had collected about Earth and its dominant species. And what they discovered kept the senior academics awake through many sleep cycles as they struggled to process information that challenged everything they thought they knew about the development of intelligent life. Maya found herself called to meeting after meeting, asked to confirm or explain details that the researchers found too disturbing to accept without verification from an actual human source. And she began to realize that her species had been dramatically underestimated by the galactic community. Is this accurate? Admiral Sixthal asked during one such meeting. Admiral Sixthal asked during one such meeting, gesturing toward a holographic display that showed a primitive human chasing a four-legged animal across an open grassland. Your ancestors hunted prey by simply following it until it collapsed from exhaustion. Persistence hunting, Maya confirmed with a nod. We are not the fastest animals on Earth, but we are among the best at regulating our body temperature, and we can keep moving for hours or even days when we need to. So our ancestors would just follow an animal until it could not run anymore. The Admiral, a large aquatic creature who conducted meetings from within a specially designed water tank, made a sound that the translator rendered as deep unease. Most predators rely on speed or ambush tactics, he said. The concept of prey being unable to escape, no matter how far or fast it runs, is deeply troubling from an evolutionary perspective. It gets better, Maya said, finding a strange pride in sharing her species' history, even as she watched the aliens around her react with growing horror. We also figured out that some plants produce chemicals specifically designed to cause pain and deter animals from eating them, like chili peppers. And we decided that we liked the burning sensation so much that we started breeding the plants to be even more painful. You consume chemical weapons for pleasure? A Kethra researcher asked, its camouflage flickering with distress. We put them on everything, Maya confirmed. Pizza, tacos, noodles, you name it. And we even have competitions to see who can eat the hottest peppers without crying or throwing up. The researcher made a note in its datapad with trembling appendages, and Maya could see it writing something that probably translated to humans are insane in its native language. But it was the discovery of human relationships with other Earth species that truly fascinated the board, particularly the story of how humans had taken wolves, one of the most effective pack predators on the planet, and transformed them into loyal companions over thousands of years of selective breeding. You befriended the creatures that hunted you? Professor Vrethkai asked during a special presentation on human domestication practices, his antennae rigid with disbelief. And then you kept them in your homes and let them sleep beside your offspring? Dogs are great, Maya said with genuine warmth. They protect us. They help us hunt. They provide companionship, and they love us unconditionally, which is more than I can say for cats, honestly. But we keep those too, even though they definitely still think they are the predators in a relationship. The holographic display showed images of humans with various domesticated animals, from tiny lap dogs to massive working breeds to horses and cattle and even elephants. And the board began to understand that humanity's relationship with other species was fundamentally different from anything they had encountered before. Humans did not simply avoid predators or compete with them for resources. They formed bonds with them, adopted them, made them part of their family units. And this pattern of behavior extended to almost every type of creature they encountered. They keep venomous snakes as companions, Admiral Sixthal muttered, scrolling through the data with increasing disbelief. They swim with sharks voluntarily. They approach wild bears for something called photographs. They allow their offspring to ride on the backs of 1,000-kilogram herbivores that could crush them with a single misstep. The human capacity for forming attachment bonds appears to have no logical limits, a xenopsychologist observed. They develop emotional connections with plants, with machines, with abstract concepts, with anything they interact with for sufficient time. But the investigation took a darker turn when the researchers began examining human history, particularly the history of conflict between human groups. And what they found made even the most hardened military analysts grow quiet with something that looked very much like fear. Humans had been fighting each other since before they had developed written language. And they had continued fighting with ever-increasing sophistication and lethality right up to the present day, developing weapons and tactics that boggled the minds of species who had never evolved the capacity for organized violence. They split the atom. Admiral Sixthel said during a closed briefing with the Union Security Council, not for energy production, not for scientific research, but to create a weapon capable of destroying entire cities in a single flash of light. And then they built thousands of these weapons and pointed them at each other. They reached their own moon, another council member added, not primarily out of scientific curiosity, but because two of their nation-states were competing to prove which one was more powerful. And they accomplished this feat while simultaneously possessing enough nuclear weapons to render their planet uninhabitable. Maya was not present for this briefing, but she was approached afterward by Admiral Sixthel, who seemed to be struggling with a question he was not sure how to ask Specialist Chen. He finally said, "Based on everything we have learned, I must ask you directly. Is humanity dangerous?" Maya considered the question carefully, knowing that her answer might shape the galaxy's relationship with her species for generations to come. "Yes," she said honestly. "We are very dangerous, probably more dangerous than you can fully understand. But that is not the most important thing about us. What is the most important thing about you?" The Admiral asked. "The most dangerous thing about humans is not our strength or our endurance or our capacity for violence," Maya said. "It is that we form bonds, we adopt things, we protect what we love with everything we have. And we never stop fighting for the people and things we care about." She paused and met the Admiral's eyes with a steady gaze. "You do not want to be our enemy," she said, "but you really want to be our friend. Because there is nothing in this galaxy that will protect you more fiercely than a human who has decided that you belong to them." The Admiral was silent for a long moment, processing this information with the careful consideration of a being who had seen many strange things in his long career, but had never encountered anything quite like humanity. "I will bring this to the Council," he finally said. And something in his voice suggested that the galaxy's understanding of humans was about to change forever. 3 months passed after Maya's conversations with the Xenological Studies Board, and life at the Academy settled into something resembling normalcy, with her classmates gradually becoming less terrified of her presence and more curious about the strange world she came from, asking her questions about Earth seasons and oceans and the peculiar human customs she had mentioned in passing. She had almost forgotten about the reports and briefings and worried expressions on alien faces when the emergency alert shattered the peace of an ordinary afternoon, sending every screen on the station flashing red with urgent warnings. Station Helios was under attack. The information came in fragments at first, transmitted through channels that were breaking down as fast as the communication officers could repair them. But the picture that emerged was terrifying. A Vraxian raider fleet, one of the most feared pirate organizations in the Outer Territories, had surrounded the medical outpost and was preparing to board Station Helios, was home to 40,000 civilians, most of them patients seeking treatment at the renowned medical facilities or family members who had accompanied them. And among the population were dozens of Academy students who had been there on a field study program, including several of Maya's own classmates. The Galactic Union's response fleet was 2 days away at maximum speed, far too distant to provide any meaningful assistance. And the station's small security force was no match for the heavily armed raider vessels that had it surrounded. Maya stood in the Academy's command center, watching the tactical display with growing horror as the situation deteriorated. And she felt something rising in her chest that she recognized from stories her grandfather had told her about his time in the military. A cold anger that pushed aside fear and left only a burning determination to act. "There has to be something we can do," she said to the officers around her. But they only shook their heads with expressions of helpless grief. "The response fleet will arrive too late," one of them said. "The raiders will have taken what they want and departed long before Union forces can intervene." Maya knew what the Vraxians took: slaves, hostages, anything of value that was not bolted down. And they were not known for treating their prisoners gently. She thought about her classmates on that station, the Plovians and the Kethri and the young Thalaxian who had finally stopped flinching every time she walked into a room. And she thought about the thousands of patients who had come to Station Helios seeking healing, and had found themselves trapped in a nightmare instead. And then she did something that no one expected. She commandeered an emergency broadcast channel, overriding the security protocols with skills she had learned from a misspent youth, and broadcasting on every frequency that human ships in the sector might be monitoring, any humans in range. "This is Specialist Maya Chun," she said, her voice steady despite the fear that gripped her heart. "Station Helios is under attack by Vraxian raiders, and the Union response fleet is 2 days out. There are children on that station. There are sick people. There are beings who came there looking for help and found monsters instead." She paused and took a deep breath. "These raiders think no one is coming to help. They think they have all the time in the world to do whatever they want to those people. But I am asking every human who can hear this to prove them wrong." The broadcast ended and Maya stood in silence, wondering if she had just made a terrible mistake. If she had revealed humanity's capacity for irrational action to a galaxy that was not ready to understand it. The answer came 6 hours later. 17 human vessels dropped out of faster-than-light travel on the edge of the Helios system, emerging from the void in a ragged formation that suggested they had not had time to coordinate their approach. And the Union officers watching the tactical display could not believe what they were seeing. There was a massive freighter called the Wandering Hope, captained by a former merchant marine who had heard the broadcast while hauling cargo between colonies and had immediately changed course. There were 3 personal craft owned by asteroid miners who had been working a claim in a nearby system and had abandoned thousands of credits worth of equipment to answer the call. There was a decommissioned mining barge that had no weapons at all, but whose captain had apparently decided that ramming was always an option. And there was a small passenger vessel carrying a family of colonists who had been on their way to start a new life on a frontier world and had diverted from their vacation. Without a moment's hesitation, none of them had military training. None of them had proper weapons. None of them had any reason to risk their lives for strangers they had never met. But all of them had heard Maya's broadcast, and all of them had decided that they could not stand by while innocent people suffered. The Vraxian raiders were not prepared for what happened next. They had expected easy prey, a soft target with no defenses and no hope of rescue. But instead they found themselves facing humans, beings who did not retreat when outnumbered and did not surrender when outgunned. Beings who jury-rigged weapons from industrial equipment and formed boarding parties with tools that had never been designed for combat. The miners used their drilling lasers to cut through hull plating. The freighter captain used cargo containers as improvised missiles. And a family of colonists somehow managed to disable a raider ship's engines using nothing but a maintenance shuttle and what the father later described as creative application of basic physics, but it was the assault on the Vraxian flagship that became legend. A boarding party of 11 humans fought their way through corridors filled with armed raiders, using everything from mining picks to fire extinguishers to their bare hands when ammunition ran out. And they did not stop until they reached the bridge. The flagship's captain was found bound in cargo netting, guarded by a 67-year-old woman named Margaret Chen, no relation to Maya, who had incapacitated him with a fire extinguisher to the face, and a stream of profanity so creative that the translator could not find equivalent words in standard Galactic. He said something rude about my granddaughter, she explained when Union forces finally arrived to find the situation under control. So I taught him some manners. The Helios intervention, as it came to be known, was over in less than 3 hours, with the raider fleet either captured or fleeing into deep space. And not a single civilian had been harmed after the humans arrived. Maya watched the aftermath from the Academy Command Center, tears streaming down her face as reports came in of grateful survivors and captured pirates and heroic acts performed by ordinary people who had simply decided that strangers in danger were worth risking everything for. "This is insane," one of the Union officers said, staring at the tactical display with an expression of pure bewilderment. These humans had no obligation to help, no military orders, no promise of reward. Many of them are wounded, and some of them are probably going to die from their injuries. Why did they come? Maya smiled through her tears and gave the only answer that made sense. "Because we heard that someone needed help," she said, "and that is what humans do."